Welcome to The Explainer. If you look at the modern Middle East and see only chaos, well, thinker Abu Ya'rib al-Marzuki wants you to look much, much deeper. Today, we're unpacking his highly debated thesis. We're examining a text that exposes the really complex, often totally unseen forces that the author argues are actively hindering an Islamic revival. This isn't just about grabbing today's headlines. It's a profound academic look at historical fractures, philosophical shifts, and geopolitical mapping. And honestly, whether you agree with his conclusions or not, al-Marzuki's framework offers a genuinely fascinating lens through which to view the crises of the region.
Okay, let's dive right into his central metaphor. The history of the global Islamic community, the Ummah, is currently gripped by what al-Marzuki calls five pincers. Now, these aren't just isolated historical accidents. According to the text, they are profound seditions, massive crises that have literally squeezed the region from multiple sides. And in doing so, they've prevented its recovery, shattered its geographical unity, and completely scattered its historical narrative. So to understand the current state of the region, the author insists we absolutely must understand how these five pincers operate.
To make sense of all this dense and fascinating material, we're going to navigate through a quick six-part roadmap. We'll hit the civilizational survival equation, the political pincers, the epistemological pincers, redefining human history, the global geopolitical chessboard, and finally, the fate of the region.
All right, starting off with Section 1, the civilizational survival equation.
Before we get to the specific pincers themselves, we really need to understand how the author views these ongoing struggles. He definitely doesn't see them as temporary political events or just bad news cycles. He views them as universal tests of civilizational survival. According to the text, these pincers are best understood through the classical concept of fitna. But al-Marzuki defines a fitna specifically as a deep historical, political, or cognitive crisis. It's a crisis so incredibly severe that it actually causes an entire civilization to forget the very foundations of its existence and survival. Think of it like a civilization suddenly forgetting its own DNA. It's an existential amnesia. And the text strongly argues that any civilization that forgets these core foundations is, well, destined for decline.
Moving right along to Section 2, the political pincers.
Now, what's really interesting about this concept is how the author draws a direct line from ancient history right to modern politics. He defines the major political pincer as the historical conflicts that originally fractured the community. Specifically, he points back to the ancient assassination of the third caliph. That was the original physical fracture. But the minor political pincer, that's happening right now. He categorizes modern nationalist and secular movements under this banner. You might wonder, why are they considered the exact same pincer? Because both act to shatter unity. He asserts that modern movements aim to kill God in the public sphere and deliberately break ethnic unity by forcing narrow, single nationalist identities onto what has historically been a very diverse civilization.
That brings us to Section 3, the epistemological pincers.
According to the text, the narrative was actually lost in the mind long before it was lost on the map. The major epistemological pincer was basically an ancient intellectual surrender. The author claims early Islamic thinkers adopted pre-Islamic Greek metaphysics, intellectually subjugating themselves by borrowing the lenses of the ancient empires that came before them. The minor epistemological pincer is the modern equivalent, misreading the present by adopting Western Hegelian and Marxist philosophies. Basically, instead of relying on their own foundational thought, modern regional thinkers adopted the heavily materialist lenses of modern Western empires. The source argues this intellectual surrender created a completely false choice between a caricatured version of modernity and a caricatured version of tradition.
So what exactly is the alternative here? Well, the author claims that the authentic intellectual tools for the region were already built, but tragically abandoned. He points to three historical figures as the true critical school. First up is al-Ghazali, who provided the definitive critique of those Greek metaphysics. Second is Ibn Taymiyyah, who offered a profound critique of knowledge theory. And third is Ibn Khaldun, who completely reshaped practical theory and sociology. According to al-Marzuki, these three thinkers represent the true native philosophical bedrock that was sitting there all along, the exact tools needed to counter those epistemological pincers.
Okay, Section 4, redefining human history.
Let's move to how this all builds into his deepest philosophical argument. Usually, traditional materialist history just looks at a straight line of physical events, past, present, and future, right? But al-Marzuki introduces a five-step spiritual structure of time. Between past events and present reality, there is memory, which is the talk of the past. And between present reality and future events, there is expectation, the talk of the future. The absolutely crucial point here is that human consciousness, our unique capacity for remembering and expecting, acts as a spiritual bridge. It elevates human history way above mere natural biological history. It's essentially what makes us uniquely human in the flow of time.
The author explicitly argues that history is absolutely not purely material. He totally rejects atheistic frameworks. He asserts that a view of history bounded on one end by a random Big Bang from nothing and ending on the other in a meaningless void completely strips human existence of any spiritual connectivity and purpose. For al-Marzouki, acknowledging a deliberate beginning and an ultimate end is literally the only way history maintains its spiritual coherence and intentional design.
All right, Section 5, the global geopolitical chessboard. Let's apply this theory to modern reality. Al-Marzouki views modern power dynamics as kind of a rigged game. On the global stage, you have the US and Europe seemingly opposed to Russia and China. But the text posits a really provocative idea. They actually share the exact same strategic goal. Both Eastern and Western global powers ultimately want to control the central Sunni region and maintain global resource dominance. To achieve this without direct confrontation, the text claims these global powers utilize regional proxies, specifically naming Iran and Israel, to actively block any centralized Islamic revival from taking shape.
And this brilliantly illustrates his point. If you've ever looked at the news and wondered why regional alliances seem so hopelessly tangled, well, here's the author's answer. It's a manufactured cycle of fear. According to the text, the fear of Israel actively pushes what he terms the Crescent Arabs toward relying on Iran for protection. Conversely, the fear of Iran pushes the Gulf Arabs toward relying on Israel in the West. It is a literal pincer movement, keeping the entire region perfectly divided, perpetually afraid and entirely dependent on outside global powers for survival.
And the author doesn't just keep this conceptual either. He names the specific geographic targets being squeezed by these global pincers right now. He identifies Syria as the absolute focal point, the main battleground designed to prevent regional unity. He points to Turkey as the primary regional power that the proxies actually fear. And intriguingly, he claims Pakistan as being heavily targeted for nuclear disarmament, primarily through pressure from India, as a necessary prerequisite to eventually exposing and weakening Turkey. According to the source, none of this is random. It's all part of a highly coordinated geopolitical strategy.
Finally, we arrive at Section 6, the fate of the region.
So, after laying out these 5 pincers in the global chessboard, the author delivers an incredibly bleak diagnosis of the modern Arab states themselves. Al-Marzouki offers a severe criticism of current regional leadership, stating they have regressed once again and returned to what Ibn Khaldun called the asabiya of Harj, the partisanship of chaos. This isn't just everyday disorganization, it's a tragic regression. The text argues that local leadership is entirely trapped in unending internal conflicts, fighting proxy wars against their own neighbors instead of actually addressing the massive civilizational pincers squeezing them from the outside.
To keep the region fragmented, the author claims that historical unities have been intentionally overwritten by what he calls fabricated modern identities. Think of Babylonian Iraq, Phoenician Syria, Pharaonic Egypt, and Carthaginian Tunisia. According to al-Marzouki, these are absolutely not historical revivals. They are deliberate traps. He argues that reviving these ancient pre-Islamic labels is a tool used by secular nationalism to fragment the geographic and historical unity of the region, ensuring the populations remain culturally isolated from one another.
So, this brings us to the ultimate question posed by the text. Based on al-Marzouki's severe warning, we have to ask, will the region find the epistemological and political clarity to actually break free from these 5 pincers? Or, through internal chaos and external manipulation, is it destined to repeat the tragic fragmentation and ultimate fall of Andalusia? It's a profound, challenging framework that really forces us to look past the daily news and view the region's struggles on a massive civilizational timescale. Thanks so much for joining me to explore this complex theory.